Detective Alex Chen had been living a lie for 3 years. Every morning he would wake up in his small apartment in the worst part of town, put on his worn-out clothes and become someone else entirely. His real badge was hidden away in a safety deposit box across the city. Instead, he carried fake identification that painted him as a small-time street dealer named Tony Rivera. The transformation was incredible. Alex had grown his hair long and messy. He spoke differently, walked differently, and even thought differently when he was Tony. His own mother wouldn't recognize him if she saw him on the street. This wasn't just acting. This was complete immersion into a world that most people only saw in movies. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had chosen Alex for this mission because of his unique background. He had grown up in neighborhoods just like the one he was now working in. He understood the language, the culture, and most importantly, the unspoken rules that kept people alive on these streets. But what made Alex special wasn't just his background. It was his ability to disappear completely into his cover identity. For 3 years, Alex had been building relationships with some of the most dangerous people in the country. The criminal organization he was investigating wasn't just a local gang selling illegal substances on street corners. This was a sophisticated network that moved millions of dollars worth of contraband from Miami all the way up to Chicago. They had connections in law enforcement, politics, and business. They were smart, careful, and extremely violent when crossed. The leader of this organization was a man known only as the Professor. Nobody knew his real name, and very few people had ever seen his face. He operated through a network of lieutenants who managed different territories across multiple states. What made this group so dangerous was their intelligence network. They had people everywhere, in police departments, government offices, and even federal agencies. This is why Alex's mission was so critical and why it was so dangerous. Alex's cover story was perfect in its simplicity. Tony Rivera was a low-level dealer who was slightly unreliable and not very bright. He made just enough money to survive, but never enough to draw serious attention. He lived in a rundown apartment building where half the residents were involved in illegal activities, and the other half were too scared to report anything they saw. It was the perfect place to hide in plain sight. The local police knew Tony well. He had been arrested 17 times in 3 years, all planned arrests that were part of his cover. Each arrest was carefully choreographed with a small group of trusted federal agents who posed as local officers. Tony would spend a night or two in jail, pay a small fine, and be back on the streets. To everyone watching, he was just another repeat offender who couldn't stay out of trouble. But what the real local police didn't know was that every arrest, every interaction, every conversation was being recorded and analyzed by federal agents. Tony Rivera was gathering intelligence on the biggest criminal organization anyone had seen in decades. He had worked his way from being a street-level nobody to becoming a trusted member of the organization's middle management. The work was exhausting in ways that most people couldn't imagine. Alex couldn't call his family. He couldn't maintain normal friendships. He couldn't even go to his favorite restaurant without worrying about blowing his cover. Every day was a performance, and the stakes couldn't be higher. One slip-up, one moment where Tony Rivera acted like Detective Alex Chen, and he would end up dead in an alley somewhere. The psychological toll was enormous. Alex had to do things as Tony that went against everything he believed in as a law enforcement officer. He had to watch crimes happen and not intervene. He had to build genuine friendships with people he knew he would eventually arrest. He had to laugh at their jokes, celebrate their successes, and pretend to share their values. It was like living in 2 different worlds at the same time. His FBI handlers met with him once a week in secret locations around the city. These meetings were brief and always felt rushed. Alex would pass along information about upcoming activities, new members joining the organization, and changes in leadership structure. His handlers would give him new objectives and remind him about safety protocols. But these meetings could never last long enough for Alex to truly decompress from the stress of his double life. The investigation was reaching a critical point. After 3 years of careful work, the FBI finally had enough evidence to bring down the entire network. They knew about the money laundering operations, the distribution networks, and most importantly, they had identified several corrupt officials who were taking payments from the organization. The case would be the biggest federal bust in the region's history, but success in undercover work is always fragile. One careless moment, one suspicious look, One person asking the wrong question at the wrong time and everything can fall apart. Alex knew this better than anyone. He had seen other undercover operations fail because of tiny mistakes that seemed insignificant at the time. What Alex didn't know was that his carefully constructed cover was about to be threatened by something completely unexpected, not by the criminals he was investigating, not by a suspicious member of their organization, but by a police captain who thought he was fighting crime by humiliating people on social media. Captain Bryant Walsh was everything Alex tried to avoid in law enforcement. He was loud, aggressive, and loved being in the spotlight. Walsh had built a huge following on social media by posting pictures and stories about the criminals he arrested. He believed that public shaming was an effective tool for fighting crime, and he never missed an opportunity to make an example out of someone. The stage was set for a collision between two very different approaches to law enforcement. On one side was Alex, quietly gathering intelligence through careful relationship building and patient investigation. On the other side was Captain Walsh, who believed that the best way to fight crime was to embarrass criminals in public and make them afraid of being caught. Neither man knew how dramatically their paths were about to cross, or how a single social media post would threaten to destroy 3 years of dangerous undercover work. The morning started like any other for Alex. He had received word from his FBI handlers that he needed to get arrested, again to maintain his cover. The criminal organization was getting suspicious of members who never seemed to have any run-ins with law enforcement. So Tony Rivera needed to have another encounter with the police. The plan was simple. Alex would make a small buy from an undercover federal agent posing as a dealer, then get caught by local police officers who were actually working with the FBI. He would spend the night in jail, appear before a judge in the morning, and be back on the streets by afternoon. It was a routine they had performed many times before. But something went wrong with the coordination that day. The local police department sent different officers than expected, including Captain Bryant Walsh, who was riding along with his patrol officers for what he called community engagement. Walsh loved being visible in the community, especially when there was a chance to make an arrest that would look good on his social media accounts. Alex didn't recognize Walsh when he was handcuffed and put in the back of the police car. The captain was supposed to be informed about the staged arrest, but somewhere in the communication chain that information never reached him. To Walsh, Tony Rivera was just another small-time criminal who had been caught in the act. During the ride to the station, Walsh kept looking back at Alex through the partition. He was studying Tony's appearance, taking mental notes about his clothes, his attitude, and his responses to questions. Walsh had developed a talent for reading people, or at least he thought he had. What he saw was a scruffy, nervous young man who looked like he had made some poor life choices. "You know what your problem is?" Walsh said, turning around to face Alex. "You think this is all a game? You think getting arrested is just part of doing business. But I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Alex stayed in character as Tony, mumbling responses and avoiding eye contact. He had learned that appearing slightly confused and intimidated was the best way to avoid unwanted attention from law enforcement. But Walsh interpreted this behavior as disrespect, which only made him more determined to teach Tony a lesson. When they arrived at the station, Walsh made sure he was the one handling the booking process. He took extra time with the photographs, making sure to capture Tony from multiple angles. He was already planning his social media post, thinking about what caption would get the most attention from his followers. Walsh had built his online presence carefully over the past 2 years. His Facebook page had 15,000 followers, including police officers from departments across the state, local politicians, business leaders, and media contacts. His posts about arrests and criminal justice issues regularly received hundreds of likes and shares. He had even been featured in a local newspaper article about law enforcement officers who were using social media to connect with their communities. What started as a way to build community relations had gradually evolved into something more personal for Walsh. He enjoyed the attention, the comments praising his tough approach to crime, and the feeling that he was making a real difference by exposing criminals to public scrutiny. His followers loved seeing the faces of people who were making their neighborhoods less safe. After completing the booking process, Walsh stepped outside the station with his phone. The lighting was perfect for the photograph he had in mind. He wanted to capture Tony in handcuffs, looking defeated and embarrassed. This would be a perfect example of what happened to people who chose a life of crime. Walsh snapped several photos, choosing the one where Tony looked most disheveled and confused. He uploaded it immediately to his Facebook page with a caption that he thought was both informative and entertaining. Just nabbed another genius trying to buy illegal substances 3 blocks from an elementary school. This rocket scientist couldn't even spell his own name correctly when we asked for identification. Our streets are safer tonight thanks to outstanding police work and these criminal masterminds who make our job easy. Share this post to let everyone know we're cleaning up our neighborhoods one arrest at a time. The post went live at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Within minutes, it started receiving likes and comments from Walsh's followers. Police officers from other departments shared their own stories about dealing with repeat offenders. Local residents thanked Walsh for his service and expressed their support for his tough approach to crime fighting. But the real explosion happened when someone shared the post to a popular local community group with over 50,000 members. From there, it spread to other groups, local news pages, and eventually caught the attention of a regional television station that was always looking for feel-good stories about law enforcement. By evening, the post had been shared over 300 times and had received more than 800 likes. The comments section had become a forum for people to share their own opinions about crime, punishment, and the effectiveness of public shaming as a deterrent. Some people praised Walsh for his innovative approach to community policing, while others questioned whether posting photos of arrested individuals was appropriate. The local television station reached out to Walsh for an interview. They wanted to do a segment about how police officers were using social media to build stronger relationships with their communities. Walsh was thrilled by the opportunity. This was exactly the kind of recognition he had been hoping for when he started posting about his arrests. The interview was scheduled for the next morning and would air during the evening news. Walsh spent the night preparing talking points about community engagement, crime prevention, and the importance of transparency in law enforcement. He planned to use Tony Rivera as an example of the types of repeat offenders who were plaguing their community. What Walsh didn't know was that his post had also caught the attention of people who weren't supposed to see it. Members of the criminal organization that Alex was investigating had started following local police social media accounts as a way to monitor law enforcement activity. They were always looking for information about arrests, investigations, and police tactics. When they saw the photo of Tony Rivera in handcuffs, several high-ranking members of the organization became concerned. Tony had been acting strangely lately, asking more questions than usual and seeming more interested in the business side of their operations. Some members had already begun to suspect that he might not be who he claimed to be. The social media post provided them with an opportunity to test their suspicions. If Tony was really just a small-time dealer, his arrest should have been routine and unremarkable. But the fact that it had attracted so much attention online seemed suspicious. They decided to keep a much closer eye on Tony when he was released from jail. Meanwhile, Alex's FBI handlers were scrambling to control the damage. They had been monitoring social media for any mentions of their undercover operation, and Walsh's post had immediately triggered their alert systems. A photo of their undercover agent being broadcast to thousands of people was exactly the kind of exposure they had spent 3 years trying to avoid. Emergency meetings were called at the federal building. Supervisors who had been planning to let the investigation run for several more months suddenly realized they might need to move much faster than anticipated. The safety of their undercover agent was now at serious risk, and they had to decide whether to pull him out immediately or try to salvage the operation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. A police captain who thought he was fighting crime had inadvertently helped criminals identify a federal agent who was working to bring them down. Walsh's desire for social media fame had created a security nightmare that threatened to destroy years of careful investigation. As the post continued to spread across the internet, gaining more attention with each share, Alex remained in his jail cell, completely unaware that his cover was being blown by someone who was supposed to be on the same side of the law. The collision between old school police work and modern social media culture was about to create consequences that none of them could have predicted. The television interview changed everything for Captain Walsh. The local news segment about his innovative use of social media had aired during prime time, reaching an audience of over 200,000 viewers. The reporter had praised his community engagement efforts and highlighted how modern police work was evolving to include digital outreach. Walsh became an overnight celebrity in law enforcement circles. Police departments from neighboring counties reached out asking for advice about social media strategies. A regional police chiefs association invited him to speak at their annual conference. Local politicians began mentioning his name when discussing crime prevention initiatives. The attention was intoxicating. Walsh had joined the police force 20 years earlier because he wanted to make a difference in his community. But after 2 decades of routine patrol work, court appearances, and paperwork, he had started to feel like just another cog in a large bureaucratic machine. Social media had given him a way to feel relevant again, to believe that his work was making a visible impact. So when the attention from the Tony Rivera post began to fade after a few days, Walsh felt compelled to maintain his momentum. He started posting more frequently, sharing photos and stories from arrests throughout his district. Each post was carefully crafted to maximize engagement from his growing follower base. Tony Rivera became a recurring character in Walsh's social media presence. Every time Alex was arrested as part of his cover, Walsh made sure to document it online. He created running commentary about Tony's supposed criminal career, turning him into a symbol of everything that was wrong with repeat offenders in their justice system. Guess who's back? Walsh posted after Tony's second arrest that month, along with another photo of Alex in handcuffs. Our frequent flyer couldn't stay out of trouble for even 2 weeks. This is why we need real consequences for people who think crime is a revolving door business. The posts about Tony consistently received more engagement than Walsh's other content. His followers seemed to enjoy following the ongoing saga of this particular repeat offender. Comment sections filled with speculation about Tony's background, predictions about his next arrest, and discussions about what kind of punishment would finally teach him a lesson. Other officers in Walsh's department began to take notice of his social media success. Some were impressed by the community response and the positive attention he was bringing to their police force. Others were concerned about the ethics of publicly shaming arrested individuals who hadn't been convicted of any crimes. Detective Lisa Park had worked with Walsh for 8 years and considered him a friend. She watched his transformation from a dedicated street cop into a social media personality with growing unease. During a coffee break one afternoon, she decided to address her concerns directly. "Bryant, don't you think you're taking this social media thing a little too far?" she asked. "That Rivera guy you keep posting about, what if he's got kids who see these posts? What if he's trying to turn his life around?" Walsh dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Lisa, this is exactly the kind of thinking that's soft on crime. These people need to understand that their actions have consequences. If Rivera didn't want his photo online, he shouldn't have gotten arrested 17 times. But Lisa's questions planted a seed of doubt that Walsh couldn't completely ignore. Late at night, when he was scrolling through the comments on his posts, he sometimes wondered if he was crossing a line. The comments from his followers were becoming increasingly harsh, with some people making personal attacks against Tony that went far beyond criticism of his alleged criminal behavior. The situation escalated when Walsh was invited to speak at a city council meeting about community policing initiatives. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the main council chambers, and Walsh saw it as an opportunity to showcase his innovative approach to crime fighting on an even larger platform. He spent days preparing his presentation, creating slides that highlighted the engagement statistics from his social media posts and testimonials from community members who supported his approach. He planned to use Tony Rivera as a case study, showing how public awareness could help identify and track repeat offenders. The night of the meeting, the council chambers were packed. Local residents, business owners, and members of the media filled the seats. Walsh felt nervous but excited as he was introduced to the audience. This was his chance to explain how social media could revolutionize community policing. His presentation started well. He discussed the importance of transparency in law enforcement and the value of keeping communities informed about crime prevention efforts. The audience seemed engaged, and several council members asked thoughtful questions about the balance between public information and individual privacy rights. Then, Walsh reached the part of his presentation where he planned to showcase his most successful social media content. He pulled up Tony Rivera's photo on the large screen behind the podium, and the room fell silent for a moment as people took in the image of the young man in handcuffs. This individual represents exactly the kind of repeat offender we're dealing with in our community, Walsh began, his confidence growing as he saw the audience's attention focused on his words. In the past year alone, he's been arrested 19 times for various infractions. Each arrest costs taxpayers money, takes officers off the streets, and puts our residents at risk. What Walsh didn't notice was that a man in the back of the room had suddenly become very still. Alex had been attending city council meetings for the past 6 months as part of his undercover work. Members of the criminal organization he was investigating had interests in several city development projects, and Tony Rivera needed to be seen supporting their political agenda. Alex watched in horror as Walsh continued his presentation, using his photograph and arrest record as evidence of failed criminal justice policies. The captain was describing Tony Rivera's supposed criminal history in detail, making up motivations and background information that painted him as a career criminal who had no respect for law and order. The beauty of social media, Walsh continued, is that it allows us to show the community exactly who we're dealing with. When people see faces like this, they understand why we need to be tough on crime. The presentation was being live-streamed on the city's website and recorded for later broadcast on local access television. Walsh's words were being preserved for posterity, and they were spreading Tony Rivera's image and supposed criminal history to an even wider audience. Alex felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. A text message from his FBI handler read simply, "Emergency meeting, 1 hour, usual place." As Walsh wrapped up his presentation to enthusiastic applause from most of the audience, Alex quietly slipped out of the building. He knew that his 3 years of undercover work were about to come to an abrupt end. The question was whether he could extract himself safely, or whether Captain Walsh's social media obsession had already sealed his fate. The drive to meet his handler felt like the longest 20 minutes of Alex's life. Every car behind him could be members of the criminal organization who had finally figured out his true identity. Every shadow could be hiding someone who wanted to make sure Tony Rivera never had the chance to testify about what he had learned during his time undercover. When Alex arrived at the safe house, his handler's expression told him everything he needed to know. The investigation that had consumed 3 years of his life was over, and it was ending not because they had successfully gathered enough evidence, but because a police captain's desire for social media fame had made it too dangerous to continue. The irony was devastating. Walsh thought he was fighting crime by exposing criminals to public shame. Instead, he had exposed a federal agent to criminal retaliation and forced the FBI to end an investigation that could have dismantled one of the largest criminal organizations in the region. As Alex began the process of transitioning out of his Tony Rivera identity, he couldn't help but wonder how many other investigations had been compromised by well-meaning law enforcement officers who didn't understand the broader implications of their social media activities. The collision between traditional police work and modern digital culture had created a disaster that nobody had seen coming, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The emergency meeting with his FBI handlers lasted until 3 in the morning. Alex sat in the secure conference room while supervisors from multiple departments debated whether to extract him immediately or attempt one final operation to salvage 3 years of investigation. Special Agent Catherine Morrison, who had been overseeing Alex's undercover work since the beginning, laid out the stark reality. "We have 47 arrest warrants ready to execute, but we're missing the top tier of the organization. Without more time to gather intelligence on the professor and his inner circle, we'll get the foot soldiers, but the real power structure will survive." The problem was time. Every hour that Alex remained undercover increased the risk that the criminal organization would identify him as a federal agent. Walsh's social media posts had created too much visibility, and their intelligence indicated that several organization members were already asking questions about Tony Rivera's frequent arrests. After hours of debate, they reached a compromise. Alex would attend one more meeting with the organization's leadership, scheduled for the following evening. If he could gather intelligence about the professor's identity and location during that meeting, they would move forward with arrests immediately afterward. If the meeting felt too dangerous, he would extract himself, and they would proceed with arresting only the lower-level members they had already identified. The next day, dragged by slowly, Alex spent the morning maintaining his Tony Rivera persona, visiting the usual places and talking to the usual people. Everything seemed normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that people were watching him more carefully than usual. Conversations that would normally flow naturally felt stilted and forced. The meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock that evening at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Alex had been to this location twice before, both times for major organizational announcements. The fact that he had been invited suggested that Tony Rivera was being considered for promotion within the group's hierarchy. As evening approached, Alex received another text from his handler. "City Council meeting tonight." Walsh speaking again. Be careful, Alex's blood ran cold. He had forgotten that Walsh was scheduled to give another presentation to the City Council, this time specifically about the effectiveness of social media in crime prevention. The timing couldn't have been worse. While Alex was risking his life to gather final intelligence, Walsh would be broadcasting Tony Rivera's image to another audience of hundreds or thousands of people. The warehouse meeting started normally. About 30 people gathered in a circle while one of the organization's lieutenants discussed upcoming operations and territory assignments. Alex took mental notes, trying to memorize every detail that might be useful for the FBI's investigation. Then something unexpected happened. One of the higher-ranking members stepped forward with a tablet computer in his hands. "Before we continue tonight's business," he said, "there's something everyone needs to see." Alex's heart started racing as the man held up the tablet. On the screen was a live stream of the City Council meeting, where Captain Walsh was just beginning his presentation about social media and crime fighting. "Some of you might recognize the person we're about to see," the lieutenant continued. "We've been monitoring local law enforcement social media, and this particular individual has been getting a lot of attention lately." The warehouse fell silent as Walsh's voice echoed from the tablet speakers. Alex watched in horror as his own photograph appeared on the City Council chamber's large screen, broadcast live to the room full of criminals who had trusted Tony Rivera for 3 years. Walsh began his familiar speech about repeat offenders and the importance of public accountability. But this time he had added new details to his story. He discussed Tony Rivera's supposed criminal history with confidence, describing motivations and patterns that he had completely invented. "This individual represents everything that's wrong with our current approach to criminal justice," Walsh declared to the City Council audience. "He's been arrested 21 times in the past year alone, and each time he's back on the streets within days. We need to ask ourselves, when is enough going to be enough?" The atmosphere in the warehouse had changed completely. Alex could feel 30 pairs of eyes studying his face, comparing the person they knew as Tony Rivera with the repeat offender that Captain Walsh was describing on the live stream. One of the organization's senior members, a man known as Vincent who handled security for the group, stepped closer to Alex. 21 arrests in 1 year, he said quietly. "That's a lot, even for someone in our line of work." Alex forced himself to stay calm, maintaining the slightly confused and defensive posture that Tony Rivera would display in this situation. "Man, that cop's got it out for me," he said, trying to sound annoyed rather than terrified. "Half those arrests weren't even real charges. They just like messing with me." But Vincent wasn't satisfied with that explanation. "You know what I find interesting?" he continued. "Every time you get arrested, you're back out the next day. No jail time, no real consequences. That's unusual for someone with such an extensive record." The warehouse had become completely quiet except for Walsh's voice continuing his presentation on the live stream. Alex realized that he was moments away from being exposed and there was nowhere to run. 30 dangerous criminals surrounded him, and at least half of them were armed. Walsh's presentation reached its climax as he displayed statistics about Tony Rivera's arrest frequency and the costs associated with processing repeat offenders. "The good news," he told the City Council, "is that social media allows us to track individuals like this more effectively. When someone becomes a public figure through their criminal activities, the community can help us monitor their behavior." Vincent pulled out his phone and began scrolling through Walsh's Facebook page, showing the other members photo after photo of Tony Rivera in handcuffs. "Look at this," he said, his voice getting louder. "This cop has been documenting our friend Tony's activities for months. Every arrest, every booking photo, Every court appearance. Alex knew he had seconds before. Someone in the room put together the pieces and realized that no real criminal would attract this much attention from law enforcement without being charged with serious crimes. His 3 years of careful cover building were unraveling in real time, broadcast live from a city council meeting by a police captain who thought he was fighting crime. The moment of truth came when Vincent looked directly at Alex and asked the question that would end everything. "Tony, why would a police captain be so interested in you specifically? What makes you special enough to become the poster child for repeat offender policies?" Alex took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of the federal credentials that he had carried hidden for 3 years. The same credentials that could save his life or get him killed, depending on how the next few seconds played out, because, Alex said, pulling out his FBI badge and holding it up for everyone in the warehouse to see. "My name isn't Tony Rivera. I'm Special Agent Alex Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you're all under arrest." The warehouse erupted into chaos. Some members ran toward the exits while others reached for weapons. Vincent stumbled backward, his face showing the shock of realizing that everything he thought he knew about Tony Rivera had been a lie. Alex activated the emergency beacon that would signal his FBI backup team, knowing that help was still minutes away. He had revealed his identity in the most dangerous possible circumstances, surrounded by armed criminals in an isolated location with no immediate support. But he had also accomplished something that 3 years of careful investigation couldn't achieve. In that moment of revelation, he saw the faces of several organization members who had never been identified before, including one man in the back of the warehouse who had been quietly observing the entire confrontation. The man was older than the others, well-dressed and completely calm despite the chaos erupting around him. When their eyes met across the warehouse, Alex realized he was looking at the professor, the mysterious leader that the FBI had been trying to identify for years. As sirens began wailing in the distance and the warehouse filled with the sound of running footsteps and shouting voices, Alex knew that Captain Walsh's social media obsession had inadvertently forced a confrontation that would either end the investigation in triumph or get a federal agent killed. The collision between old-school undercover work and modern digital exposure had reached its breaking point, and the next few minutes would determine whether 3 years of dangerous investigation had been worth the risk. The FBI tactical team arrived at the warehouse within 4 minutes of Alex's emergency signal, but those 4 minutes felt like hours. The chaos that erupted after his revelation had split the criminal organization members into 3 groups: those who ran immediately, those who tried to destroy evidence, and those who prepared to fight. Alex had positioned himself behind a concrete pillar, using skills he had learned in federal agent training, but hadn't needed during his 3 years as Tony Rivera. The transformation from undercover dealer to federal agent was jarring, but adrenaline kept him focused on staying alive until backup arrived. Vincent, the security chief who had been questioning Alex's identity, made the mistake of trying to reach for his weapon. Years of undercover work had given Alex insights into how these men thought and moved. He was able to anticipate Vincent's actions and subdue him before backup even entered the building. When the tactical team breached the warehouse, they found a scene that exceeded their expectations. Not only was Alex alive and unhurt, but the confrontation had forced several high-ranking organization members to reveal themselves, including the man Alex had identified as the professor, who was calmly surrendering with his hands raised when agents flooded the building. The man's real name was Dr. Richard Hoffman, a former economics professor who had been presumed dead for 5 years after disappearing during a federal investigation into university research funding. His expertise in international finance and logistics had made him the perfect leader for a criminal organization that moved millions of dollars across state lines. Dr. Hoffman's capture was the breakthrough the FBI had been hoping for. Unlike the lower-level members who knew only their specific roles, he possessed complete knowledge of the organization's structure, finances, and connections to corrupt officials. His arrest would lead to the largest organized crime bust in the region's history, but the success came at a cost that nobody had anticipated. Captain Walsh's social media activities had created a security nightmare that forced the FBI to end their investigation months earlier than planned. While they caught the major players, dozens of smaller network members escaped because the timeline had been accelerated. The immediate aftermath was complicated by media attention that Walsh had never intended to create. His live-streamed city council presentation, which had been viewed by thousands of people, had inadvertently documented the moment when a federal investigation reached its climax. News outlets across the country picked up the story of the police captain whose social media obsession had accidentally exposed an FBI agent. Walsh learned about the true identity of Tony Rivera the same way everyone else did. Through news reports the following morning, he was at home, scrolling through the positive comments on his latest Facebook post, when his phone started ringing, with calls from reporters asking for his reaction to the revelation that his favorite repeat offender had actually been a federal agent. The initial shock gave way to horror as Walsh realized the implications of what had happened. His desire for social media fame had nearly gotten a federal agent killed and had compromised a major investigation into organized crime. Every post he had made about Tony Rivera, every photo he had shared, every mocking comment had been helping criminals identify someone who was risking his life to build a case against them. The internal investigation into Walsh's conduct began within hours. Police department leadership, already sensitive about social media policies after several national incidents involving officer misconduct online, moved quickly to review every aspect of Walsh's digital activities. What they found was troubling. Walsh had been posting photos and information about arrested individuals without following proper protocols for protecting ongoing investigations. His desire for social media engagement had led him to share details about cases that should have remained confidential until after court. Proceedings were completed. The review board's findings were released 3 weeks after the warehouse incident. Walsh was found to have violated department policies regarding information security, social media conduct, and interagency cooperation. His rank was reduced from captain to lieutenant. His social media accounts were suspended, and he was reassigned to administrative duties pending further review. The criminal organization's trial became a landmark case in federal court. Dr. Hoffman's testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, exposed corruption networks that reached into police departments, city governments, and business communities across 4 states. 43 people were ultimately convicted, including 2 police officers, a city councilman, and a federal courthouse clerk who had been providing inside information about ongoing investigations. Alex's undercover work received recognition within law enforcement circles, but the praise felt hollow. He had spent 3 years building relationships with people he genuinely liked, only to betray them when circumstances forced his hand. The psychological toll of maintaining his double identity, combined with the trauma of his exposure in the warehouse, led to a year of mandatory counseling and temporary reassignment to desk duties.